In this lesson of Sharh Kitab al-Da' wa-Dawa, Shaykh Abdul Razzaq al-Badr, Hafidhahullah, continues explaining Ibn al-Qayyim's chapter on zina, focusing on the hidden starting point that often leads to this major sin, the gaze and letting the eyes wander. He reads Ibn al-Qayyim's words that Allah commanded His Prophet ﷺ to order the believers to lower their gaze and guard their private parts, and to teach them that Allah sees their actions and knows the betrayal of the eyes and what the chests conceal. The Shaykh explains that in the verse, Allah mentions lowering the gaze before guarding the private parts, showing that the problem usually begins with what we look at. He quotes Ibn al-Qayyim's statement, "Most calamities begin with the eye, just as most of the fire comes from a tiny spark. A single forbidden look can be like a small spark that later burns the heart if it is not stopped." He summarizes the well-known sequence. It starts with a look, then a thought, then a step, then a sin. First comes the look, then that look generates a thought in the heart. The thought grows into a repeated idea. The idea turns into desire. The desire becomes a will and a firm decision, and then the act of disobedience happens if nothing stops it. Shaykh Abdul Razzaq al-Badr, Hafidhahullah, stresses that being patient with lowering the gaze at the beginning is far easier than carrying the heavy sorrow and inner conflict that come after falling into sin. He recalls a beneficial saying that Ibn al-Qayyim mentions: "Whoever protects these four has protected his religion, the looks, the thoughts, the words, and the steps." The believer must act like a gatekeeper over these four doors: what his eyes see, what thoughts he allows into his heart, what words he lets out of his mouth, and where he goes with his feet. Quoting Ibn al-Qayyim, he says, "As for the looks, they are the scout of desire and its messenger, and guarding them is the foundation of guarding chastity. The eyes are like messengers that send images to the heart. If those images are unlawful, they leave marks, and the heart may become attached to them. The more the person keeps looking, the more he fills his memory and his feelings with images that disturb his worship and his peace." The Shaykh mentions prophetic traditions about lowering the gaze. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Do not follow one look with another. The first is for you, and the second is not for you." He also reminds of a hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ promises paradise to whoever guarantees a number of matters. Among them, speaking truthfully, fulfilling promises, rendering trusts, lowering the gaze, guarding the private parts, and holding back the hands from harm. Abdul Razzaq al-Badr, Hafidhahullah, explains that in our time, the forbidden gaze is no longer limited to real-life situations in the streets or markets, but often comes through screens, phones, tablets, computers, and TVs. He describes these devices as a huge test. If they are not used in obedience and beneficial knowledge, they become doors of evil, bringing images and scenes that corrupt the heart and open the way to zina. He warns that many people have turned their devices into open doors for shaitan to enter their hearts. Through them, unlawful images and videos come in, desire grows, faith weakens, and the heart becomes heavier in worship and obedience. That is why anyone who wants to cure his heart must begin by controlling his eyes and being selective about what he allows on his screen. The Shaykh then explains Ibn al-Qayyim's detailed chain. A look generates a passing thought. The thought becomes a reflection. The reflection becomes a passion. The passion becomes a will, then a firm determination, and finally an action. Unless Allah places a barrier, such as fear of Him, shyness, or some practical obstacle. All of this inner movement started from one moment when the person could simply have lowered his gaze. He ends by quoting the phrase, "Imprisoning the looks is easier than enduring long-lasting regrets." He invites the listener to choose the simpler path, a small struggle to look away now, instead of a long struggle later to heal a wounded heart and escape from a sin that has taken root. He concludes by asking Allah to help us lower our gaze and purify our hearts, and then sends prayers and peace upon the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ.